Hey, you're listening to a Bible Brodown podcast, a member of the Trinity Commission. This is where brothers come together to sharpen one another so we can rightly divide the Word of God. I'm Matt.
And this is Billy.
And today, we finished Galatians last week. Hopefully you enjoyed that. And it's still plenty of time to send us questions. Heck, if you got questions on our Roman study, you can still send us that. There's no statute of limitations on bringing up old issues that we've talked about. But today, we're going to take it a little easier. Going to do something, I think, kind of really different than what we've done in the past. And that's just talk about church. Specifically, hopefully this episode comes across as you, the listener, sitting down with Billy and I, asking us questions about, hey, how do you go about looking for churches? What are you looking for in a church? What are some things that you can let go of and you still attend the church even though you disagree? What are some things that you can absolutely just not, you won't let go of that particular topic, and the church has to believe this way? And yeah, I don't know. How would you describe today's episode, Billy?
Yeah, part of it is that, and just we're going to give our opinion on a lot of things, and that's, some people out there may think our opinion should be a doctrine or a dividing line, where some of our opinions will not be. It wouldn't be something that we would like, oh, if this church believes this, we're not going to go there. It's just be our opinion or our preference, so to speak.
Yeah, and I will say that there are going to be times, maybe where Billy and I disagree. I don't know. We haven't actually gone through the answers to all these questions yet. But
right.
And honestly, it'll surprise me if we disagree. But even if we do, or if we disagree with you, the listener, like you said, it's our personal preference. I will say that some of the answers that I'll give are based somewhat on just how I've grown up and the tradition that I've been in. And as much as I try to not let tradition influence me, it's hard on some of these questions not to think, I'm more comfortable with this other way.
It's your church culture, really.
Really, yeah. I'm used to. I mean, I grew up in Baptist churches. Mm-hmm. You grew up in Baptist, right? Mm-hmm. More or less. So that automatically, I'm more comfortable in a Baptist setting than I am maybe a Pentecostal setting, or a very liturgical Lutheran setting. Not that, we'll get into that. But yeah, anyway. Yeah, so, I don't know. Any announcements or whatever before we get kicking?
No, I don't think so. When this episode comes out and we haven't yet picked a new logo, yell at us on our Facebook group.
Yeah. I actually scrolled through them the other day, just looking at all of them and thinking, gosh, there's pluses and minuses to all of them. And I try to think, how is this going to look on the website? And a lot of them would look fantastic on the website. And I think, how would this look on the bottom of a coffee mug? Because I feel like, when you lift your coffee mug, you want people to see it, especially when we're on the camera. How would this look on a hat? And not that we're going to be pushing merch at everybody, but me personally, I want my own fitted hat with the logo on it. So
what you're saying is basically you're just being very superficial.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. This is all about looks, and
right.
It has nothing to. If we weren't worried about looks, we would leave it exactly how it is and not even bother with it.
Uh-huh. But likewise, if we were worried about looks, we would probably have a better production, and I wouldn't have all this stuff behind me.
yeah, and the website would be real slick and brand new, and I mean even the way not that I'm knocking on our website, but I was going through it today, looking at all the tabs and everything, and thinking, yeah, there's some really new, slick designs out there that would look good for this, but we don't really care about that stuff. At the end of the day, we're worried about the content and not necessarily what it looks like. But we have had enough of you lovingly mention that it's old looking.
Right, content and functionality is kind of we're both very practical. But that doesn't mean that, we wouldn't want to drive around in a Ferrari.
You can have your Ferrari. Give me
I'm just throwing out a car.
Mid-60s Mustang. Yeah.
Right.
Oh man. But anyway, yeah, we'll pick a logo and whatever, and then we'll start fiddling with the site. And yeah, there's some stuff that you and I need to talk about, Billy, and whether or not we stick with this platform or maybe migrate to another one. And I don't know. It's all hard because
which platform? This platform?
No. For the website, we use Sitelio or whatever the new company is, and they have some options in there that are neat looking, but there may be better ones out there. But how do you transfer all of our studies? Is that even possible to transfer that many studies without doing it manually? So we'll see. I don't know. But we do. That is the plan. Q1, 2019, fix it up.
Yep, I agree.
All right. Where are we starting? Just general search?
So, yeah, basically a lot of people have questions about churches. When they're looking for a church, they have questions about those churches, like certain questions they want answered. Some people sit down with pastors or staff of churches. Some people go out to websites, etc. And some people really don't care at all. They kind of just go to a church, and if it was nice, then they continue to go. But a lot of these questions tend to separate one church from another. Like, this is how we get denominations sometimes, based on doctrines, based on style. And a lot of these questions, sometimes the answers to those determine where someone decides to go. So with that, this episode is going to be like, what are our major dividing lines, and what are these preferences and opinions that we have about, these various beliefs? But I think to start with, how long have you been in your church? How long have you attended?
I've been attending it for about a dozen years now, but about 5-6 years ago, we did take a break and go look and check out other churches in the area. So I've been here for a while, though.
I definitely have more experience at different churches than you do. Part of that was my background with the military. And even I've not been in the military now for 9 years, but I've still moved like 8 times. So that still involves finding other churches too. So how people out there who are looking for a church, some people maybe, I know we know someone who may be looking for a new church soon based on things. And how do you go about finding a church?
My first step, call it lazy, call it, digital age, whatever. I go to the websites. I'll do a Google search. So I know the area really well, and I'll know, so and so goes to this church. I'm going to check it out. First thing I do is go to their website, and I look at their doctrinal statements, and we'll talk about what is plus or minus later. The next thing I do, and more churches are doing this, is I find their online, not directory, their online list of sermons. Their past sermons.
Right.
And especially if they have a podcast, and it's not that expensive to put a podcast up. So a lot of churches are just putting them in podcast form. You can search for them on Apple, find their little logo. I'll binge through 4 or 5 of them, because the first thing I want to know is, how's the pastor? Do I even like what I'm hearing from the pastor here before I go find out, what do I think about the children's ministry, the adult ministry, and all this other stuff? Because if I don't like the pastor, that's kind of a deal breaker for me right off the bat. If I think the preaching style is just not something that fits me.
Right. Screechy voice, I don't know.
If he's too short, I really can't handle short people. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Yeah, what about you? Where do you start?
That's the same thing for me. I usually pull up Google Maps and type in churches, start clicking on those, start going to websites. Usually if a church doesn't have a website, that's like, I'm not going to go to it, because I like to be able to have some research done before I go to a church, right? Kind of know what I'm expecting. Some people may think, well, that's not really a good way to judge it, but there's lots of churches out there. And in order to if you're going to pick a college, if you're going to pick a school, if you're going to pick a move, these are things that you do research on before you go. And that's what I do too. Listening to sermons, run through the statement of beliefs, listen to sermons. And then if those seem to jive, that's when you go and take a couple of test runs.
Well, and the alternative is you just show up, right?
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. You decide you're going to go try the Methodist church down the road. So on Sunday morning, you show up. You at least look up their time so you know when to show up. But you just show up, and if you like it, you like it. You don't, you don't. That's fine. It's just when you want to check out 20 different churches, you don't want to spend 20 weeks doing it. So that's why we do it the easier, faster way, and just binge through their stuff. And their websites contain all the information you're kind of looking for anyway. So make good use of them. That's why they put them up.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that turns you off when you're doing it that way?
I will. So this is maybe a kind of how do I say this? So there's several things I'm looking. Like I said, there's several things I'm looking for, and before we get into doctrine, just right off the bat, if I go to a church's website and it's very old, and I realize I'm dogging on us here after what we just said about our own website. But if it's very old styled and there's not a lot of content there, I immediately think, this might not be the younger, and not that younger is better, but I want to be fellowship with and be around people that are not just 60 and above. I want to have people my own age. I want to have people around that have kids that are close to my kids' age, so that they develop relationships too. And immediately, if the website is really poorly put together, and it's not the right way to do it, but I immediately think, this is probably not the right crowd for me. Am I wrong for that?
I don't know. I think that sounds like a Leighton song. Am I wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, if the church's website doesn't have functionality, it makes me think about the functionality of the church itself on Sunday and what it's going on. It could just be lack of resources, but that's fine. But I mean it is a factor. At least Steve mentioned, it doesn't have a lot of content. At least our website has that as content and functionality. It works and it has a lot of content.
It does. No children's ministry, but we're and that is, it's a superficial thing. I get that. But if I'm just, feeling out, I guess I should say it that way. If I'm just feeling out what churches to prioritize when I'm looking, that's something that it registers in my head. Oh, this church seems to have it together in terms of audio, visual, and website maintenance and keeping their stuff, their video and audio digital so that we can check it out, things like that. That's a plus for me. They're thinking about those things. So, but yeah, that's kind of a superficial thing. The church could still be fantastic and not even have a website.
Correct. And you may hear about it from a friend or yeah.
It's just word of mouth.
Yep.
So one of the things we said was doctrinal statement. Billy, you and I both have read hundreds of doctrinal statements.
Very much so. Mm-hmm.
What are you looking for when you click on that? It's usually the "What do we believe" tab, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to see?
What am I looking for? What am I not looking for? And what turns me off?
Yeah.
It's funny because a lot of churches, I think it came back. I started seeing it way back in the Rick Warren phase, where churches started doing. There's a whole spiel about bases and church doctrine statements and how to grow your church. And somehow it came about that if you have less like beliefs listed, then somehow it means that people won't see something that they don't like and not come. Right. That tends to be how a lot of this happens. So there's a lot of generic and they all look the same doctrinal statements out there. You could almost go back to what Jonathan says over at Trinity Radio, where they basically just like list the Orthodox early church creed beliefs, right? We believe in God.
Orthodoxy.
Yeah. Right. And they're all like that, which is fine and dandy. But there's still a lot of other things that are preferential. Now, if they had that, and even then, because everyone is doing it, then there's no distinction between one and another. So it's kind of a turnoff. I personally like it when I can click on beliefs and there's a PDF that's like 40 pages long. I like that. But that's me. That might not be for everyone. Some people may see that and be like, oh my gosh, I do not want to go there. The messages are going to be like an hour and a half.
Well, and that it's not easy believism. What's the word? It's more of a seeker-driven model. When they do that, they just put up the core beliefs, and but their focus is getting you to it, and then they want to work with you. And there's something to be said for that, but you run certain risks, and this isn't the episode to go through the way to run a church. That's different. And I'd love to have some pastors on actually and talk to them about different models. But the thing that I look for isn't necessarily. I'm not looking for specific things. I'm looking for. I'm keeping a close eye on what they're lacking. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
If I go to it and it's just simple belief statements, we believe in the Bible and Jesus and God, and it's like it's a bunch of stuff that you go, well, yeah, duh, okay, so you're a Christian, I get it. Um, that worries me a little bit, because I think, well, the church leadership, I feel like, would want to put more time into it than that, especially for people if they're trying to draw not only the seekers, but also what about mature Christians who understand the Bible and want to come and be beneficial and teach and whatever else? How do I know that I'm going to fit into this place if you haven't even bothered to explain it on the website where you claim that all your beliefs are? Now, the other side of it is they could just copy paste the Baptist Faith Message 2000 and say, this is what we believe. And I don't know if that's true or not, but they just put up that standardized thing, and I guess that's fine. But I think the danger comes in the growing number of non-denominational churches where, okay, they're not saying they're Baptist or Methodist or Lutheran or whatever. They're just a church, but they're not going to explain what it is they believe. I don't know what I'm getting into. That worries me a little bit.
Right. Yeah. There's some. It used to be where if a church listed its denomination in its title, if you went to a website or even whatever, they would just point you to their, like you said, the Baptist Faith and Message or some creed or whatever. But that's not the case anymore. A lot of churches that may even be Baptist won't even reference that they're Baptist on their website. That they're tied to the Southern Baptist Convention, for instance, and they support the Baptist Faith and Message. You can't even find it on their website. They've went to the model of, basic 101 beliefs. And again, it's to try to not give people reasons not to come, I think.
Yeah. So what else do we want to cover as far as looking?
You could get into some outside things, like size may stop you from, that initial assessment. Size, is it a big church, small church? What are you looking for? Right.
Multi-site versus not. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, so you attend a multi-site church, right?
Yes. First time I've done that.
I attend a multi-site as well. It's structured a little differently than yours, and there are different models for how to do that. And we're not going to debate the pros and cons of multi-site versus not, and which ones work better than the others. That's different as well. It's not in this episode, but yeah, I could definitely see some people saying, I don't want to go to a church where the main pastor is in a different town. I want to be in the same room with him every time. I don't want this multi-site thing. That's fine, but the website will tell you that.
Right.
Yeah. I don't care, honestly. For the purposes of fellowshipping, being able to teach, being able to learn, participating in small groups, my kids are getting the programs that they want. Multi-site works fine. The campus that I go to is great.
Yeah, I think that, again, it all depends on how that happens, Again, we're not going to go into pros and cons of that, but same thing with me. We love our local campus and the campus pastor and the family and all the things. I mean, each campus for us has all of the things that would be at the normal one. The only difference is that you don't have the guy that's preaching at your location, but everything else is still a church.
Yep. So you, Billy, go to the website, you find a church, you click on their doctrinal statement. Let's say it's a good one. It's something it's the proper 40-page PDF that you want to pour through and understand. Give me some idea of what your dividing lines are. Like, let's say you see, and this is no mystery to our listeners, but you see, we're the 1689 London Baptist Confession, Calvinists, and it's diehard Calvinism throughout it. Obviously, both of us are going to go, it's probably not the church for me. But aside from Calvinism, what are you looking for that you don't want to see?
I would have had a lot longer list in the past, but it's definitely gotten smaller. We just mentioned those basic beliefs 101, right? All those are basic beliefs 101. So, if somebody just had that, then that's fine. Generally speaking, though, you really don't know the details behind those beliefs because, as you said, even some of those like Reformed churches will have those generic statements. And then you go there and then you find out, that they're reformed. And there's a lot of underwriting behind all of those statements. But yeah, soteriology would definitely be a big dividing line for me. And again, it's not that I can't fellowship with him. It's just that the premise of a lot of the messages is different. The premise of how we look at scripture, how we look at God, all those things is so different. It just wouldn't be a very good fit for me or my wife.
One of your spiritual gifts is teaching. Same with mine. That's why we do what we do. And for me, I'm not going to go to a church where they're adamant about something like that. And I do go to a church that leans Calvinistic, but they're not adamant. They're not pushing it. But I'm not going to go to a church that is adamant about it. And I know that I won't be able to use my spiritual gift in that place because they're not going to want it.
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, how tightly gripped are they on that particular doctrine is important to me too. Right.
Yeah, I would, for the dividing lines, I would agree with, again, what we mentioned earlier, what Jonathan mentions, and he takes it from Austin Long of the Paleo Baptists, the basic beliefs of the first 3 creeds. Is that correct?
I think it's something like that. They got a snappy little saying, 3 creeds.
That I haven't memorized. but yeah, basic premises of God and the Trinity and who Jesus is, and the cross and the plan of redemption, and probably that's it. If I saw anything outside of the norm, like something that may tend itself to works based, that would be a flag for me, where they start mentioning certain things that are required. That would be a dividing line for me. And again, it doesn't necessitate that it's wrong or that scripture could lean that way if you read it a certain way, just like Calvinism, right? It's just that that would not be a place that I would attend.
Okay, so let's throw out some rapid fire ones, and I'll ask one. While I ask you, think about it and throw me one back. You're on the website and you're reading through the doctrinal statements, and it says something about it doesn't describe the Trinity. Instead, it describes modalism, that God in 3 different modes has appeared to people and worked with them, but they are apparently more oneness. They don't believe in the Trinity. Yeah, would you go to that church?
No, I could fellowship with them and praise God with them and pray Jesus with them. But I wouldn't attend because there's a lot of fundamental differences, I think, in that.
When you talk about soteriology, the universal witness, none of it works without the Trinity.
Right.
Like it's kind of, I couldn't get around that. Absolutely not. I just, like you said, I'm not going to anathematize someone because they've come to a different conclusion. I will strongly disagree with them, but in a loving way that we're supposed to correct and teach and rebuke and everything.
Right. You could look at various things about Jesus. I mean, I think that involves the Trinity, just understanding Christology. But Matt, if a website church talked about how they're dispensational and that's their foundation, I mean, dispensationalism tends to lend itself to a certain style of teaching, certain thought processes, certain ways they look at Old Testament, New Testament.
It depends on how, I'm going to use the word pushy. I don't know if that's the right word, adamant, whatever. Depends on how strongly they push that, or if the leadership is, and this is, I will say there's times where you're going to get down to the point where maybe you want to meet with the pastor, the teaching pastor, someone who understands what the church believes and can sit there and explain it to you instead of you reading their website and their generic thing that they have posted up. That's a good idea sometimes. It's good to get that out there and have a person clearly explain it. And that's a situation where I'd want to know just how strongly are you pushing this dispensational thing, and what would you do?
I think I've seen different levels of dispensationalism. Like you said, there's some who are adamant about certain things. I mean, obviously, dispensationalism as just like a definition. There are, in essence, different dispensations, right? Different levels of knowledge, just like covenant theology. Yeah, there's different covenants, and how people understand them. I think that would lend itself to whether or not I would go or not. What you brought up though about sitting down with a pastor. Question: if you get to that stage and you're sitting down with a pastor or teaching pastor, is there anything in that interaction with you that would cause you to want to not go there? Example might be what about sitting down with a pastor? Your their level of knowledge.
So you say level of knowledge, you're talking about how well they can converse on theological matters, and you're not talking about how many degrees they have.
Correct.
Okay, so level of knowledge. That's very important for me because, as two full-time employed folks not in the church with families and everything else, and we can come to, I think, a decently high level of knowledge on the Bible and everything. I feel that anybody in church leadership and eldership should probably have that level as well, or at least maybe not in the particular areas we've focused on. But I think biblical literacy is it has to be there. And if I get the impression that they don't have that, that's a big turnoff for me, I think.
I agree. It's one thing, and biblical literacy is a good phrase. It's one thing that to have biblical literacy, but tailor your Sunday messages to like that lower denominator, right? That people off the street can kind of understand this message. Right. But still at the same time, if you sat down with someone and you were going deep, you could discuss those things with them. It would be hard to go to a church where that couldn't happen. Like that, the level of literacy was low in general.
And just to be clear, Billy, how many theological degrees do you have?
0.
How many theological classes have you completed assignments for? Same number. Yeah, me neither. We're not knocking on seminaries. We're not knocking on people who don't have masters or PhDs or MDivs or whatever, demons. That it's not about the degree. Right. It's about the level of knowledge, level of understanding, and honestly, so that's important to me. And going back to the kind of interview situation.
Right. Yep.
The willingness to actually have it. If it's pulling teeth to actually get to go and talk to someone, and how warmly they receive that request, that's kind of important to me, because I don't want to be in a church where it is pulling teeth to actually sit down and talk to a pastor, and it feels like they're going out, or they're this is kind of throwing a kink in their day, versus someone who actually feels like they want to interact with you, and they want to be they care about your questions, things like that. That's important to me.
Right. It used to be where I was more concerned about what the pastor said versus various doctrines. And now it's not so much that, but it's the level of maturity I get from the pastor, and how, going back to what we've mentioned in the Trinity Commission, like sitting at the adult table and having conversations about different beliefs and different takes, and how open they are to that. And I like to ask the question, what have you done when you've come to a different conclusion or belief that you didn't hold before? And if they say, well, I've never changed anything, then that's a red flag to me.
It's possible they could have gotten it all right the first time. It's not probable, but it's possible.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and not just what did you do when you came to a different conclusion, but what did the church do when one of the past elders came to a different conclusion? Because I think that's telling. How do you handle a situation where a teacher or leader in the church did change their position? Did you decide, this person no longer believes in pre-mill dispensationalism? Now they're saying they're amillennial. They got to go. Or do you say that's a difference of opinion, and we're not going to kick you out, or we can work around it. We'll have discussions. That's the mature thing, like you said. That's the more mature way to go about that. And definitely, that's a plus versus just you got to go. Sorry.
Right. In that same, so we talked about kind of dividing line, about going back to that Paleo Baptist, those basically core confessions,
Paleo Orthodox.
Of the early church creeds, right. And then you have another category, because we've kind of went from that to just preference, right? But there's a separate category, and this is kind of where denominational things start being divided, and that's really, and we have an episode on this with Braxton, sacred cow positions of denominations. Again, this goes to, you could look at Reformed theology, like their sacred cows would be the tulip, so to speak, right? Total depravity, and those are sacred cows.
Right.
Some, I don't want to say, I guess I could say traditional Southern Baptist, a sacred cow is once saved, always saved. So with these, and some of these sacred cows would be, for some people, would be spiritual gifts and their use of them in the church. Right. They could be baptism, water baptism are some sacred cows.
Sacrament versus ordinance.
Right.
And then how those are applied. Yeah.
Right. And then some sacred cows could also be men and women in teaching roles or eldership roles. Or could be some sacred cows. So some people even add some, really superficial things about sacred cows, but most of those tend to just be secondary, tertiary issues that, most people don't, they have a preference, but they don't really care.
So go to church leadership. I tend to like the elder-led model. I think that's more New Testament than having a head pastor, having an associate pastor, having a children's minister, and then the deacons kind of vote on and run everything. That's more of like this weird Baptist thing going on. My church, while they do have the labels, I think, of head pastor or senior pastors, things like that, it runs very much like an elder-led church. They just don't call them that. But I don't know, do you have a preference? Do you really care on one way or the other?
I think it used to be, again, I used to be pretty adamant about elder-led. I even left a church over that at one point. And it wasn't because it wasn't elder-led. It was because the pastor actually agreed with me that the biblical model is eldership, but because his congregation couldn't handle that and couldn't handle the change, he didn't do it or teach on it. That was when I left, because of knowing the truth and then willingly going against it. But I've since understood that there are many different exceptions and reasons why you may not necessarily have the availability of elders, right? And I
Sure.
leave that open to various locations and geographies and such as that. But I think that is always, or should be, the goal or the objective. If I'm going to some random location and I'm starting a church of new people, right? My goal should be to develop and mentor, so you can have an eldership of, or plurality of elders who are, overseeing the local body.
Probably need to have a whole episode on ecclesiology, because as you're talking, the question of committees, rule by committee and democratic process, versus more the elders kind of make the big decisions and then the church just approves things like budgets, things like that. I've witnessed firsthand the committee and the business meeting situation get completely out of hand and lead to a church split. It was terrible. And so I see the benefits of having a strong eldership that just says, we're not going to debate what color the floor is in the new sanctuary. We're just going to have it put in, and we'll talk about how much the church is willing to spend on that, since the church itself as a whole is funding it. I see the strength in that, but I also see the benefit of having your lay people involved in the decision making of the church, because they make up the church. So there's pluses and minuses. But do you have a preference one way or the other in terms of whether or not there should be
involvement of the congregation,
democratic processes involved in the?
I don't really have a preference. I think no matter what, in any of those, there should be an open book, so to speak, on if it is elder-led and they're the ones making decisions. There should be like an open book on how they came to those decisions and why they came to those decisions and what money is be spent where and all that stuff. Yeah,
I get that. Yeah, I really don't. As long as it's done well and there's not a bunch of contention involved in this process, I'm fine with either. But for a dozen years, I've been in the more strong elder leadership than I have the other model, and I still like it after a dozen years. What was another one? Oh, so we have in 1 Timothy 3, the rules for overseers and deacons. husband of one wife, has to be not a new convert, in good standing. Their children can't be running crazy. Not that you can't have children that act out, but you shouldn't have children that are just, wildly inappropriate and demonstrating that you aren't keeping your house in order. Things like that. So I think that goes without question. That should be criteria that the church uses to choose their elders. But what about, I don't know, is there anything else that you look for in leadership? Like we said, we're not worried about a degree necessarily. We do want maturity. But anything else?
In terms of like elders, I understand that, and I just heard Jonathan teach on this recently, or speak on this, about it's hard to, you have this criteria, right, of elders. And my personal view is that the senior pastor, if you want to call him that, or teaching pastor, if you want to call him that, or Sunday pastor, if you want to call him that, is also one of the members of the elder team, right? So he's one of many, and they're all, equal. That if you're going to bring in one of those senior pastors who's going to be your teaching pastor on Sunday, that it should be someone that you've grown in the church and not someone from 8 states away, because it's very hard to actually have a good understanding of all those Timothy requirements, so to speak, Right. And I think that's fantastic, especially when I really have changed over the years on what elder means, and taking it where, just like an elder in a family, it's someone who's has experience and been through and is already naturally guided and people look up to and all that stuff, that it's like they are naturally an elder, right? And oftentimes it relates to age. And I think it does relate to age a lot, because that relates to experience. That's why Paul says, don't have someone too young or something like that. So yeah, I'm a firm preference to that should be someone that's been mentored in the church. I think some of the other requirements, should elders, are they required to be married, or are they required to have a certain kind of education?
So let's take the marriage one. We're just talking personal preference. There is no didactic verse in the New Testament that says an elder has to be married. He could be a widower, right? But I am going to take very seriously, I consider very seriously the issue of a younger pastor. And I'm not knocking fresh out of seminary pastors, but there are younger guys out there in their late 20s that are running churches. I think Braxton actually was the lead of a church for a while in his 20s and mid 20s. If that person is not married and they're over a church, that is ripe for temptation. And that, I don't know, I have my own personal problem with that kind of situation. Not that I'm questioning their knowledge or their understanding or ability to communicate, or even their ability to organize and work with the church. But in terms of just the temptations of being single versus the outlet of being married, and now we don't have to go into detail on all of that, I would prefer a married person. Not just as head pastor, but also as a children's minister or as a youth minister. If I have teenage daughters and I'm going to a church, I don't want the young, good-looking, single youth minister being the lead on the church program, on the things. I'm going to have to go to all of them, or my wife will, just because, I'm paranoid. Not that marriage will stop inappropriate relationships, but it absolutely helps. And I hate to throw the Catholic Church under the bus here, but they demand that their priests are single, and they have all kinds of stuff happening that they should not have. And I think marriage is, God gives us that outlet, that relationship, for a reason, not just to mirror him, but also Paul says, if you that being single and celibate is a gift, meaning most of us don't have that gift probably,
right? And
marriage is good. So I prefer married.
Yeah, I think in marriage you also learn a lot and understand things about, there's so many things about Christ and the church and marriage and wife and things like that would be missed and not fully understood kind of thing, I think, if you don't have that experience. And I agree. I think I could see an elder being a widower, obviously. But that I agree with you. I think having that marriage, and again, this isn't to knock that you can't be young and have the gift of teaching and not teach. There's certain roles that I think just based on preference and the like aren't necessarily a good fit. Whoops.
Did you just if you're not watching, you missed Billy almost fall over backwards out of his chair. Okay, so we prefer marriage, being the elders being married over not. Obviously, all sorts of caveats to take into consideration. What about man versus woman? Do you?
If they're fighting, who would win?
Yeah, who would win in a fight? No, in high heels. No. Do you have a preference? Do you want your eldership to be a mix, all male? Would you go to an all-female elder church?
I don't think I'm there yet. I'm definitely in the scratching your head category right now. Used to be not, but I'm definitely in the category. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I'm ready. And it was funny is my wife isn't either. She wouldn't want to attend a church where there's women elders and such. Now, again, that doesn't mean that we don't think that a woman couldn't teach in some capacities, in some roles, or even in front of the church on a Sunday, talking about something. That's not anything that we're saying. It's just the specific role of, if it's, a former role of elder, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I think Heather and I are in the same place. I'll say this. I don't have a problem with deaconess. I don't have a problem with women being deacons, because that role is specific. And I guess we kind of skipped over the role of deacons in the church. But that role is specific. You are there to take care of children, orphans, widows, help the people that need help, pray with them, etc., that the eldership can't necessarily get to. It's a supportive role that's meant to help take care of the church. And so, man, woman, as long as you have a heart for it, I don't care. I mean, I'm going to still apply the criteria that Paul gives, but to an extent, it doesn't matter for me, man or woman. Now, elders, this is where, again, this is our opinions, and this is where tradition and just what I'm comfortable with comes in. And I prefer men. I would rather have men as the elders of my church, and I'm not comfortable enough with the argument for allowing women to be elders. Not saying that I don't know it. I'm just not sure it's solid enough. Frustrate maybe some people that we're friends with, to go to a church that's female elder led.
Correct.
And are there teaching positions and things like that yeah, sure. Can a woman come back from missions and stand up in front of the church and for 30 minutes explain what they've done on their mission trip and how they've worked with the people and get that? Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm not hating on all that, but when it comes down to the group of elders that are making the final decisions for the church, call me the pawn of the patriarchal whatever. I'm comfortable with men right now. I can't.
You're comfortable with men?
You know what I mean. I prefer male eldership.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right, Matthew.
So that's
yeah. So if there was a church that had women elders, you would prefer not to go there.
Right. I would bypass that. And mainly because I still associate, I would think that there are some liberal tendencies in that church, and it would just color my experience of them and what they believe right off the bat. And that, right or wrong, and it may not be right, but that's gonna be a hang up for me.
Right.
When I could probably go to a church that's just as good, that's male leadership, and not have that hang up. So
if it is true that women can be elders, then I'm one of weak of faith, as Paul would say in Romans 14.
So be nice to us.
Exactly. All right. Some other things. How long have we been going so far?
44 minutes.
So we have some shotguns that we have to do here. Church's stance on stance on giving/tithing.
If they're not asking me to give a bank statement or demanding that I enroll in something so that they can check up and make sure I'm giving a strict 10%, I don't really care. I'll give what I'm going to give and what I'm comfortable with, what I believe that I have no negative conviction over, and that's between me and God.
Right. I could attend a church that thinks that you should give, but I don't believe that, first of all. But as long as they're not forcing it, I don't care what they think about it.
Right. Exactly. And I've been to churches like that in the past.
Right.
Long time ago.
And for those of you who want to know about our complete understanding of that, we have a 3-part series on tithing or giving in the New Testament. So, and it actually ends up being, more so big picture wise. We're called to give more to more people. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Ordinances. So Lord's
Communion,
Supper,
baptism.
Where do you fall on that?
I've been in churches that do it like once a blue moon, once a quarter, that they didn't really have a set time when they do it. They just did it certain times. Like, right. I don't know, somebody said, oh, I got a shiver, so we should have communion. That's how it could have been that way. I don't know. And now I attend a church that does it every Sunday. A big picture, I think, is what's behind the belief, why they're doing it. It seems like many of them are just trying to be faithful. And I think it goes back to, is this efficacious? There we go. And that's the biggest one for me.
It's efficacy.
Yeah.
Right. If they're saying that it has to be done in order to be saved, I disagree. And I would never teach that. And that probably is, that type of adamant position on that particular subject worries me in terms of what else are they holding on to that they shouldn't, that the Bible doesn't really push. Those things are debatable. The Lord's Supper. I don't care if you do it every Sunday, if you do it once a quarter, if you do it once a year. Honestly, I think if they walk around and hand you the little juice cup and the little stale cracker, they're doing it wrong anyway. And we haven't had an episode on that, but I don't think that's what it was. It was a dinner. They were sitting down. They were breaking bread together, as in having a meal. When Paul talks about it, was it 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians? He's talking about people who are going to a dinner. And if they are, if someone who doesn't have a lot shows up, don't eat all your food before they get there and be drunk by the time they show up and things like that. Like it's meant to be more of a fellowship. It sounds more social, and I don't know. We could have a whole episode on that, but as long as they're not
social fellowship, reflective, social fellowship and reflection, and remembrance. Yeah, definitely. I thought it was interesting because we have it once a week, and this is the first time I heard my pastor say, hey, if you're out watching, because he actually mentioned that like 3 times, people watching, maybe because it's been so cold here, people are just watching the video. But he's like, hey, if you're watching, we're getting ready to have communion, go grab something out of your fridge. Like, he didn't care what you grabbed. He just
Facebook Live, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually turned around. I was like, well, it really doesn't matter if you go eat anything either. It's just if your thought is at this time to remember Christ and what he did, you're doing it right. So, yeah.
But yeah, if they're not demanding that you have to do it in order to be saved, like in the Roman Catholic Church situation where they think there's all sorts of shenanigans with that, then that's fine. What about service style, particularly the worship?
Like hymns, traditional. If it has a choir, if there's a band, some people even get like, well, if it has drums, then I don't want to go.
Lasers and smoke machine, yeah.
Right. I don't really care about any of that. I definitely have preferences, but I don't care about it. I guess I do have a higher care where if it really feels like a rock concert, I don't like it at all.
It depends on the songs they play, honestly. If it's super showy and the songs are super shallow, I'm concerned at that point.
Right. That's what I mean by rock concert. Yeah.
Yeah. But if it's super showy, but also they're mixing in like some great hymns and like the music is the lyrics are spot on and it's just good, then fine. You just made it showy and people are gonna like it. I don't have a problem with flashy, as long as there's substance to it.
Right. Yeah. That's how I am with all praise and worship, is substance.
What about what about a church where you love the sermons, you've listened to them online, you love the church statement and everything else, but when you go on Sunday morning, it's they are focused on psalmody. Like it is only psalms, or maybe, some very strict hymn stuff, psalms, and it's very liturgical. It's more reverent, maybe isn't the right word, but they treat it more it's more of
solemn.
a solemn, reverent look, situation. Would you still go to that church?
Probably. I actually like hymns a lot because they tend to have depth. But anything that becomes rote, and it can become rote on singing, Chris Tomlin every Sunday, that can become rote if it's the same song and the same,
Right.
Yeah.
See, I don't know if I could go to a super liturgical, traditional type of setting, because I don't know. Personal preference, I guess. And I guess that's important to point out. In some of these things, it really doesn't matter if you have a good reason or not. If there's no good reason to reject it, then you're kind of free to do what you want with that situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a good reason to reject a very traditional, very solemn kind of service. I just don't like it that much. I do have a reason to reject superficial, super shallow worship service that is meant to be a rock concert. So I will reject that.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess when you say if it's solemn, if it's just like all depressing songs, then I probably wouldn't want to do it. But if there's like hymns, which can also be uplifting,
they could be good.
Yeah. Baptism, water baptism, and with baptism, I think what falls into this is also church membership, because many times membership relates to baptism, at least for a lot of churches.
We grew up Baptist. If you're not baptized, then you're not a member, and you can't eat the cracker and drink the juice, and you can't vote. That's basically the extent of membership. I don't really care, honestly. Now, it reminded me to get to pedo baptism, because that's, I think, important. But
we can start there.
Okay, so if the church has a stance that kids need to be baptized, I have a problem. You can't show me that in Scripture. If they say that, yeah, we'll allow kids to be baptized, I think that's basically every Baptist church. I do have a slight problem with that, because, for instance, my son is...
Will allow kids to be like certain ages?
Like 5 or 6 year old.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, little Johnny wants to be baptized. And I was baptized at 6, so I'm not hating on you if this is your situation or your kids. I'm just saying now, having thought about it, my son asked to be baptized, and I was like, oh, exciting. And he said, yeah, hopefully Jesus will get me a Nintendo Switch. And I said, you know what? We're going to hold off on that request. and he always brings it up again when the cracker goes around, and he's like, I want to do the juice and the cracker thing. And I'm like, yeah, buddy, you don't understand yet. And really, you're not, quote unquote, getting saved by being splashed in that water up there. If you trust the Lord, then you're saved. And that's just a sign of it. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to let you do it. I'm not going to let you go up there and say that you understand when you can't explain it to me and your mom.
Right.
And that's my own personal position. And so I am skeptical of the young age at which churches allow people to be baptized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our church allows anyone for communion that says that they profess Christ. They don't ask anything about baptism. And relating to that, they only use baptism as a water immersion baptism as, hey, if you want to be a member, then when were you baptized? Water baptized, immersed. But membership in my church just means that you're on a list. There's nothing else that is involved with it. That's all it means, is you're on a list.
Pretty much. When you get into those more democratic or committee run churches, that's when I think membership means more, because I'm a member. I'm going to be a part of this pastor search committee, and my opinion has a lot of weight. So being a member means something, I think.
Right.
Whereas multi-site churches with the strong elder leadership, member, I will say it allows me, because you have to be a member in my church for, I think it's 6 months, and they do a background check and everything else before you're allowed to help with children or teens. And I'm cool with that. And I don't want any Joe Blow off the street coming in and working with my children. So
right.
that situation I appreciate.
Yeah. What was something involved with that?
I got one of you.
Oh, and my pastor even said at the one monthly meeting with like new people, he's like, the Bible doesn't have anything about church membership, right? Like local church membership. So that's why it's not a huge thing. Basically, it puts you on the list, and I don't know what else it gives you. I think he may have said one other thing, but I'm not sure what it is. But
I do see it as a way of tracking people in good standing. So if you go to a Baptist church and someone is trying to transfer in, but their old Baptist church is saying, yeah, that person left because he was committing adultery and refused to repent of that, and so we removed him from the church. Keeping tabs on that kind of thing, I think, is important, because the church has exploded, and it's no longer the local church of a town. It's not the church of Ephesus where you probably knew everybody in it. I mean, there's millions of us out there. Having some kind of tracking thing is, I think, a little helpful, but ultimately impossible to implement completely.
Right.
What about opportunities to serve? I mean, teach, whatever.
Yeah, I definitely look for churches that are looking, and I loved what my pastor said actually at the Connect one. He's like, if you're looking for a church where you just come and sit and you're not committed to serve the body, then maybe this isn't the church for you. So they're looking that when you come here, it's the point is to serve in some kind of capacity. It's not pew warmers. So a service oriented, the point of him is to equip you to serve, and you should be serving.
I'll take it one step further. I think that if we're going to have this thing called church membership, service in some capacity should be required. I think there should be, if you're going to join the church, I think there should be a period where the elders, or an elder, if you have like a class or something, gets to know you to make sure you actually believe what the church believes. Maybe you disagree on some things, but on the core facts, the new member actually believes. And then when they do believe, when they do become a part of the church, you say, okay, where would you like to serve? And they're signed up for it. Part of that is because I've never experienced a time where I got to know the people around me better than when you're serving beside them. It just doesn't happen. I mean, yeah, you can have your game night once a month or something, but Fifth Sunday sing along doesn't help you get to know people. But if you're with them every week, every other week, and you're teaching a youth class, or you're helping whatever, rock babies, you're going to get to know those people, and the fellowship that you develop bonds with them, but also you are holding that person to exercising their spiritual gift. Maybe you have to help them understand what it is, but helping them exercise their spiritual gift for the benefit of the kingdom, versus telling them it's okay to come, be marked present, and then turn around and leave and not actually contribute at all. I think if you're going to be a member, you're going to be a member that actually participates. Most churches don't do that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think if more churches taught on spiritual gifts, and that they're all needed for the body, and then you're claiming to be a member of the body, and then you're not serving the body, I think some loving pressure right is good, because that it's really, are you doing this for checking a box? Are you actually here to try to serve God faithfully? I mean, he's obviously equipped you with something, and you're not using that. So there's some accountability there, I think.
What's the standard that Christ expects? We
Right.
bear fruit. We abide in him and his love, and we bear fruit. I don't see why the local church can't apply that same standard and say, hey, we love you. We obviously want you to be here. We want to make sure that you are equipped to benefit the body. We want to experience your gift, whatever it is. And we want to also make sure that you have the outlet and the means to produce fruit for the kingdom, because that's what God expects of you. And so not even loving pressure, but just say it's just a requirement. I mean, you want to participate in this family that we've developed and you're going to be tighter for it. Then, hey, okay, yeah, here, sign up here. Where would you like to serve? And maybe it's not internal, maybe it's outward focused. You're going to have to figure that out congregation to congregation. But I think it's absolutely biblical to force the matter.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, and you can understand that, some people may not be at that level yet, and that's fine. Like, oh, I don't feel ready to do it. But if it's been like 8 years and they've been attending church for 8 years, and what's going on here? There might be some issue. And I'm okay if they say, oh, well, I am serving. I'm just not serving locally. I go to the mission downtown every Tuesday and Wednesday, or I don't care. Just encouraging that and such.
And yeah, there could be any variety of ways that they serve, and you don't want a new Christian going in and teaching a men's group, right? But maybe they could show up for a prayer meeting. That it's a certain group of people, they get together once a month to do this prayer thing, or they go and help a local food. I don't know, whatever. It could be anything, and it for different levels of maturity. And you're going to have to get creative in how you outreach, but. What's the worst that can happen? You reach more people for Christ, So I just think that's something that should be implemented that I don't ever see. Right.
All right. We're really talking a lot. Well, you're really talking a lot.
No, you're talking a lot.
Real quick. Do you care about prophecies and end times if their church is big on that?
As long as they don't push the matter, I don't care what they believe.
What about the Bible version? If the church is big on a certain version of the Bible,
if they're King James only, nope. They're better. King James isn't bad, but they're better. And I prefer to understand what the heck you're saying versus Old English. So, yeah. Speaking of tongues and prayer languages,
like the outside spiritual gifts, tongues. Prophecy, I suppose one could use.
Having an open mic prophecy moment at the end of their service. Yeah.
I'm not. Well, if they think that tongues is a sign of salvation. Then no. Right. No, right. Not happening. But I'm open that the gifts could be there. We've mentioned this before. Neither of us have seen them, I don't think, in person, like at a service, or been around them. But we were not saying that it couldn't happen. But I wouldn't I've actually went to a couple of churches recently. I guess when I say recently, I mean like within the past 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, that were charismatic. But when I went, they didn't have anything that's charismatic. I don't know. Yeah.
I get concerned. I won't go to a church that has an open mic prophecy night or a thing at the end of their service. I'm sorry. If God's going to have someone speak to the church, they're going to do it. They're going to do it in the way that He intended for them to do it. And that leaves too much open for abuse there. And then tongues, if when you sing and praise the Lord and you find yourself speaking in a language you don't understand, and it's kind of a private thing and not something you're doing out loud or disruptively, I guess that's the key for me. If it's not disruptive, fine. If it is, and they're allowing it to go on and nobody's interpreting, no. Right. That's against the Bible.
Following the biblical model, right?
Exactly.
What if the church says if you're on staff, you can't drink alcohol?
Then if you are going to be at that church and want to be on staff, obey the rules. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't agree with that, and I mean, if they say,
I'm not asking if obviously you can have that, and I agree with you if you're on staff and that's a rule, then you should follow it. I'm saying, would you go to a church that required staff, and that staff includes anyone that's teaching? We'll say that way you're in this as well. Would you go?
Now you made it personal. Would I go to that church? I do kind of go to that church. They don't want. Yeah, call it out. No, they don't want any of their leadership to drink alcohol, and I understand that, and I'm fine with it. Not that they have a biblical case for why, but it's more of a practical thing. People struggle with alcohol, and as big as my church is, if the staff are drinking out, even just on a date with their wife or whatever, a lot of eyes are on them, and they want to avoid causing anyone to stumble. I get that. They don't force that situation. It's the same for the deacons as well. They don't force that situation on lay leadership. I think they would just prefer that we refrain, and for the most part, I do. But if I'm on a date with my wife and we're off in a corner of a restaurant and I have a glass of wine, I don't feel guilty for it. They didn't ask me to sign anything, so I don't have a problem with that kind of church.
Okay.
Just being safe. You?
If the church I don't have a problem if that's just their preference that, hey, or their requirement that if you're going to be on staff, you can't do this. Not that you can't, but we just prefer that you don't. I'd be okay with that. Now, if they try to have some kind of biblical case that you couldn't do it, then that'd be different. Solas. What if the church doesn't believe in the solas?
Then I'd be like, hey, we have an episode on that. where we end up disagreeing with most of the solas also, just because nobody has a solid definition of what they mean, because everybody makes up their own definition. So right. I think they're just a Protestant cheerleading point and not necessarily something you should lean on.
Mm-hmm. The type of teaching, exegetical, topical, sermonizing, modern sermonizing. I mean, that's a whole separate category. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's separate. Feel good. Yeah, so I don't care about topical or exegetical. If you want to march your way through a book and you do it well, awesome. If you're going to do topical and you do it well and exegetically and you make sure that it's sound, awesome. I don't have a preference on that. Now, if your sermon involves more stories and more feel-good stuff than it does Bible, I have a little problem with that. And not that you can't mix those in now and then, because there are some situations where, for instance, and again, I love my pastor and my leadership of my church, so this isn't me knocking them at all. There was a situation several years ago where a young person in the church, I didn't know them, but they committed suicide. And the sermon, like the 2 days later, he kind of scrapped his notes and went off book and just, he talked about a lot of stuff that was spurned by, or spurned, that's not the right word. Anyway, that came from that sparked this issue because of that suicide. And it was a very moving thing. To the extent, he even put his personal cell phone up on, and this, I have like 3,000 people in my church. He put his personal cell phone up on the screen and said, "Look, if you're ever to this point, call me. Don't do it." And it was a plea. It was a heartfelt outreach to all the people that he shepherds. And in that situation, it's a special situation. That's fine. But if it's a weekly thing where it's always feel good stuff, or you scratch God's back, he'll scratch yours. That kind of. I'm not going to go to that church.
Okay. Speaking of, so earlier you mentioned listening to sermons. And then what about, would you attend a church that the teaching isn't bad, it's just, how do I say this the right way? It's just you're getting like 2% out of the sermon, right? It's basic 101 stuff.
So we're running close to the end. Actually, we're a little over, but this is an issue that has to do with the point of, or it's part of the bigger discussion. Should we have deep teaching in the service or deep teaching in small groups? Or can you have deep teaching in both? What is the point of these different things? And I see the argument for the more surface level, basic, milky type stuff being given in the sermon, because more people show up to that. And then the pastor directing them, look, for deeper, plug yourself into one of these connection groups, one of these small groups, and that's where the deep dive Bible study is going to happen, because you could spend an hour and a half talking to these people about it versus trying to explain something deep in 30 minutes from the stage. So I get that argument. I think there's still a way to mix in depth, and go listen to Trinity Radio from a couple months ago. Braxton and Jonathan talk about what is deep, and some pastors have the ability to speak to everybody in the congregation, but at the same time feed the people who understand in a deeper way. And I think that's just a skill that's developed over time.
Yeah, I agree. My intent isn't, it goes back to the big picture of why you're going to church. It isn't to get fed. It's to, with my gift and my purpose, it's to help equip other people and help feed other people and teach other people. So I'm not going there, for that specific purpose. In terms of the pastor, I think I've never really thought about this, but I think if the pastor is only doing that shallow, and shallow doesn't necessarily mean negative, but that shallower,
milky,
in depth, and he never has a way or a time where he himself is going deep and teaching deep, then you're doing a disservice to, I think, him. It's like, hey, everyone, let's swim in the shallow pool, and he knew how to swim in the deep part at one point, but for the past 20 years, he's only been swimming in the shallow end. It's a skill that he may lose, how to go deep. And I think it's benefit for him to have that opportunity. So, yeah. So if all he's doing is teaching on Sunday and it's that shallow, I think you should look for ways to help your pastor to have a deep point where he can go deep.
Don't ask your Olympic swimmer pastor to only show you how to doggy paddle. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Show me the good stuff. Let's get to the deep stuff. Yeah, interesting. Right. I agree. Give your pastor the opportunity to do that for sure.
It used to be back in the day that they would do it on like Wednesday night service and Sunday night service.
Mm-hmm. I find that too. There are, and I keep up with several different churches and podcasts and stuff, and a lot of them do the deeper, harder topics on Sunday nights, because generally you have your more faithful is not the right word, but your more interested people showing up on a Sunday night to see that, whereas you may have a much broader category of people show up on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, we're an hour 12 minutes. We could probably keep going for another hour, but I don't think people would appreciate it, and we probably already frustrated a lot of our listeners anyway at this point. It was opinion. It was just us and where we're at right now. But I tell you what, Billy and I are completely open to being proven wrong. Let's say you think that women should absolutely be elders, and you've got this great article or whatever that you think we should read that proves that point. BibleBrodown@gmail.com. Send it to us. We'll read it. Heck, we'll read it as an episode, and we'll engage with their arguments and their scripture. Same for any topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. And if there's other things that, hey, I'd like to hear you guys' personal opinion or preference on X, Y, or Z, go out to Bible Brodown on Facebook and ask us a question in our group.
Yep, or we may make it a mini. You never know. But anything else before we bail out?
I don't think so.
Next time on the mini, we're going to be talking political involvement for Christians. And that should be an interesting discussion. So, until then, God bless.
God bless.